Well, the 5th edition Player's Handbook for Dungeons & Dragons is unambiguous. There are such things as gods. Or at least, under the section in which the cleric is explained, we're told that divine magic flows from the gods. It flows from the gods into the world where it is captured and channeled by clerics. Thus, the very base lore of the game Dungeons & Dragons appears to be a theistic one, a polytheistic one, gods, plural. But what if you want to run a slightly different kind of campaign world? What if you want to run an atheist campaign world? How would you do such a thing? Would you have to eliminate the cleric as a class? Well, not exactly. Here are 2 ways for atheism to be true in your Dungeons & Dragons campaign without eliminating the cleric class. Basically, there are 2 strategies to make atheism true in your campaign world despite the existence of empowered clerics. You can either rewrite the lore of the game so that the beings clerics worship don't exist, or you could rewrite the lore of the game so that the beings clerics worship aren't really gods. Either way, you get to have clerics who worship beings, and those beings give them magical spells, but you don't have to admit that theism is true in this universe. Let's go over how each one of these would work. One way you could proceed is to rewrite the game's base lore so that, although clerics think that they're worshipping gods, they aren't. They might believe that their powers come from these incredible beings that they worship, but in actuality those beings don't exist, and something else gives them their powers. Maybe they're actually just tapping into the magical weave which encircles the world, doing the very same thing that wizards do, just in a slightly different way. Or maybe clerics are a kind of psychic individual, whose magic is actually powered not by a god, but by the intensity of their belief in one. Under this conception, clerics would be very much like paladins, who get their powers from an oath that they make. Either way, you get the same result. There is still such a class as a cleric. It still has all of the class features which the Player's Handbook describes, including its spellcasting. It's just that the entire class is based on a kind of false pretense, or false presupposition. The clerics aren't getting their powers from where they think they're getting them. As an illustration of this approach, we might consider the 2nd edition D&D campaign setting, Ravenloft. In that campaign setting, there were several individuals, such as Yagno Petrovna, who worshipped gods that did not, in fact, exist. In the case of Yagno Petrovna, he worshipped Zakata, the god of hunger. There is no Zakata, and yet Yagno is a priest of Zakata, a cleric who can cast spells. From Yagno's perspective, he's getting his spells from Zakata. However, in truth, it is actually the nebulous nature of the plane of the Shadowfell itself, the plane of Ravenloft, which is giving Yagno his spells. Now, does that shadowy nature count as a deity? Well, it needn't, and that brings us to our second approach. Instead of rewriting the campaign lore so that the beings which clerics worship don't exist, you could just rewrite the campaign lore so that the beings which clerics worship are not actually gods. Instead, the beings which preside over magical clerical domains such as light and trickery and knowledge are more like warlock patrons than they are like gods. Under this conception, a cleric may pray to Mishakal, the god of light, and there may be such a being called Mishakal, which dispenses powers of light to the clerics who pray to Mishakal. However, Mishakal isn't really a god, even if Mishakal is worshipped. Instead, Mishakal is, well, a monster, or a great old one, or a demon, or something of incredible power and influence, but which is not actually a god. Here, it's worth looking at Volo's Guide to Monsters and reading a couple of choice paragraphs about the philosophy of the Yuan-Ti when it comes to religion. The guide says, and I quote, "The detached intellectual nature of the Yuan-Ti doesn't lend itself to fervent or devout worship in the manner that others revere their deities." And later in the guide, it states that the Yuan-Ti's dispassionate attitude towards religion is accentuated by their goal of apotheosis. In other words, the Yuan-Ti see gods as differing in rank and power from mortal creatures, but nothing else. And in their ecclesiastical societies, the yuan-ti don't really worship creatures that other people call gods as much as try to become them, try to ascend to them. Instead of recognizing a gulf between the mundane and the divine, the yuan-ti recognize a kind of continuum, where there's no difference in kind, just a difference in degree. There are no real gods, just increasingly powerful creatures. You could have this interpretation of theology be true in your D&D campaign setting, and also have clerics who get power from those beings that they worship. So those are two ways to incorporate atheism into your campaign without eliminating the cleric class. On one hand, you could rewrite the campaign lore so that the beings which clerics worship do not exist, or you could rewrite the campaign lore so that the beings which clerics worship are not really gods after all. Now, in addition, on the topic of atheist characters, there's a fun question you might ask about atheist clerics. Could you have a cleric of atheism? Would that even make sense? Well, again, I think there are two fun ways to go about it. Unsurprisingly, the two ways to play an atheist cleric kind of correspond to the two modes of atheism I just described. The first type of atheist cleric is one which is aware that the beings which other clerics worship don't exist. This cleric is aware that other clerics are in fact tapping into the weave or tapping into psychic powers. And so, they do the same thing, but honestly. This would be like the cleric domain of rationalist philosophy, or something like that. They believe that they have discovered a new energy source, which is falsely reputed to be divine. They still get all their cleric spells, they still get all their cleric abilities, it's just that they, unlike the rest of the clerics, know where it really comes from. The other approach for an atheist cleric is much weirder, and I like it because it's so weird. This second approach is what I like to call the witless cleric of the hermit god. This is a person who goes around preaching atheism and, somehow, gets magical powers from doing so. How? Well, it turns out that there is a powerful being out there which was once worshipped as a god, or which might still be worshipped as a god, and this being hates that. It doesn't want to be worshipped, it doesn't want to be noticed, it wants to be left alone. Now, it has magical power which it can dispense to mortals, so who does he give that power to? Why, in this case, the being gives that power to all of the creatures which go around and spread the word, don't worship divine beings, don't worship that creature. The hermit god, in other words, is a powerful being which doesn't want to be worshipped as a god, and which, to pursue that end, is willing to give magical powers to anyone who will stroll the earth and preach atheism. I know, right? I said it was weird, and it's weird, but it's another way to bring an atheist PC into your campaign and have them be a cleric. But anyway, what do you think? I realize that this is actually quite a hot topic right now in the D&D community. Lots of people are talking about atheism and theism in their campaign settings. Have I overlooked something crucial? If so, let me know in the comments. Thanks again for watching. Don't forget to do all the internet things, click like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell icon if you want notifications about new content on this channel, which I update weekly. Thanks very much!